Aloha. Welcome to another video for IT 426, Computer Network Services at Brigham Young University, Hawaii. In this video, I'd like to explore some of the issues related to selecting server software, particularly as it relates to this course in Windows Server 2008. We've already talked about moving through the decision-making process of selecting an application architecture, selecting server roles, and selecting server hardware. Now we're looking at server software, and particularly in the sense we're trying to get a feel for which Windows Server software do we need to utilize. Okay. Now there are various versions of Windows Server 2008, and there's for large-scale enterprises or smaller enterprises, there's Standard Edition, there's Data Center Edition. But the focus on this chapter is not so much among those versions, but that there's versions of Windows Server 2008 that you can install, and then there's kind of scaled down versions of Windows Server 2008 that you can install. Okay, and we're going to look at those, particularly the web server edition of Windows Server 2008 and the server core version of Windows Server 2008. So we'll look at those two. We're also going to discuss a little bit about terminal services and some of the licensing requirements and considerations for that. So the rest of this video is going to be the web server edition of Windows Server, the server core edition of Windows Server, and the terminal services available through Windows Server 2008. Selecting application server software, it's important to know what options you have available in Windows Server 2008. As I just mentioned, we're going to look at terminal services, the web edition of Windows Server 2008, and the server core edition of 2008. Okay. First of all, terminal services. As I mentioned in a previous video, we're going to look at terminal services in great detail in this class. So we won't spend a lot of time here. Just the underlying message is it's a service that's available for you to log into the server which hosts the application and runs the application or the desktop experience for you. Okay. So the thing to know from this chapter about terminal services is that you need to purchase additional client licenses. Although terminal services comes as part of Windows Server 2008, it does not come with the additional client licenses needed to be able to use the service. So you have to pay for those in addition to the cost of licensing Windows Server. Windows Server does have a 2-license feature in that that allows you to run the server as well as for an administrator to remote into the server to perform maintenance. But that's separate from the terminal services. Okay. Next we have Web Edition. This is a scaled back version of Windows Server 2008 that is focused on just hosting websites or hosting web applications and services. You need to be aware that it cannot function as a domain controller. We don't get into Active Directory domain controllers a whole lot in this course, but just know that if you're trying to create a directory and manage all of the objects and users and devices on your network, you'll need to use Active Directory for that, and you cannot use the web edition of Windows Server 2008 for that. Also, any web applications must use Internet Information Services. Using any other web server platform to drive applications on this server is prohibited. Okay. Next, SQL Server is not available for the web edition, but SQL Server Express Edition is. So you can only use the SQL Server Express Edition on a web edition of Windows Server 2008. Lastly, the web edition is not available as a retail product. Okay. What that means is you can't go out and purchase it or download the web edition online. You need to have an enterprise license with Microsoft to be able to purchase the web edition. Okay. Next, let's look at Server Core. Okay. This is a stripped down operating system that has virtually no graphical user interface. Okay. There's also a limited number of roles available. This list here is a subset of the much larger list that's described in your textbook or that I reviewed previously that's available for Windows Server 2008 in general. So we have 2 Active Directory roles, and then server core can also be used as a DHCP server, a DNS server, and then we have these 3 roles: file services, print services, or the web server. Okay, so if you're looking for something as an Active Directory domain controller or Active Directory lightweight directory services or any of these roles, then server core may be something that you'll want to consider. But you need to be aware that you'll need to administer this server from either the command line interface, the CLI, or from the remote Microsoft Management Console. The MMC snap-ins can be started up on an external server, another computer, and then you can remotely connect to this server. Okay. The advantages of server core, lots of reductions and stuff. There's a reduced failure potential. You have fewer parts, fewer components, so fewer problems with interactions and fewer problems if your system crashes. Next, there's reduced hardware requirements. You don't need as expensive hardware to run the server core. Reduced number of updates that you have to manage and install. And with fewer pieces and fewer blocks of code interacting, you have a reduced or a smaller set of potential security vulnerabilities. Okay. So that's a brief introduction to the server core, the web edition, and the terminal services for Windows Server 2008.